Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Elliott, President and CEO of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's program, co-hosted by the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and the Korea Society. Our two organizations, for those of you who don't know, collaborate a lot on a variety of programs and projects focused on U.S. and Republic of Korea relations. But we even look at other things, Korean Peninsula, security, and the broader economic and trade and security issues in the Indo-Pacific. Everyone, I think, because you're here, knows the Korea Society, but for those of you who don't know the National Committee, we've been around. In fact, this is our 50th year, so it's our 50th year celebration. Hans Morgenthau founded our organization in 1974, and we've been long committed to peace and security in the Asia-Pacific region and around the world. But we also focus on maintaining channels of communication and dialogue through informal, non-government discussions and diplomacy. And in addition to doing those informal dialogues, we do programs like this with our friends at the Korea Society, and we host similar dialogues looking at other relationships, not only U.S.-ROK, but Japan-ROK-U.S., PRC-U.S., Taiwan, cross-strait dialogues, and strategic dialogues with our colleagues from the People's Republic of China. So I don't think I need to tell any of you here that, tensions in the Korean Peninsula have risen over the previous months. Kim Jong-un recently announced that North Korea would no longer be pursuing reunification with South Korea. And the past few months have also seen fracturing of the Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement and an increase in military testing by North Korea, as well as advancements in North Korea's nuclear program. So these are some of the issues we want to discuss today, and we've assembled a distinguished group of experts. Professor Moon Chung-In, who we're very glad is here with us from Seoul. Susan Thornton, who not only teaches at Yale University, but she's the director of the NCAFP's Asia program. And Markus, Garlauskas, who is joining us virtually, and Tom Byrne, who will moderate today's discussion. They're going to discuss the issues that I've mentioned and more. But before we begin, I'd just like to thank Tom and the members of the Korea Society for allowing us all to use their great space. But special thanks also to Jonathan Corrado, Director of Policy, who works very closely with us and our staff, Chelsea Alexander, Michaela Schaefer, and their interns and AV technical staff, who without them, we wouldn't be able to be hosting and having a virtual discussion today. So we look forward to what I know is going to be a very insightful discussion on these issues. And just a reminder, we're recording the program, which is on the record. So I want to thank all of you again today for coming, and those of you who are in our virtual audience, thanks for tuning in. And I'd like to turn the program now over to Tom Byrne, President and CEO of the Korea Society. And he will moderate today's discussion. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Susan. And thank you all, our in-person audience, for carving out time to come, as Susan says, to our great space here on 350 Madison Avenue. And I'd like to echo Susan and say that the Korea Society is grateful for our partnership with the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. We are also fortunate in that today's panel is likely to reflect a range of views on some of the most important debates concerning Korea of our time. In view of North Korea's advancing weapons program, its deepening military relationship with Russia, and rising geopolitical tensions over Taiwan, not to mention the escalation and threatening rhetoric from North Korea. I'm looking forward to hearing the panelists' views and insights on these complex developments. I want to thank the Korea Foundation and our corporate sponsors for making this program possible. You can find their names prominently displayed on the screen in the lobby. We are welcoming your questions live. We will provide an opportunity for in-person attendees to ask questions directly. For our virtual audience, please send your questions throughout the program to policy@koreasociety.org. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Professor Moon Chung-In is Vice Chair of the Asia-Pacific Leadership Network. He is a former Special Advisor of National Security and Foreign Affairs to the South Korean president from 2017 to 2021. He attended all 4 inter-Korean summits, 3 in Pyongyang and 1 in Panmunjom, as a special delegate. He is currently the James Laney Distinguished Professor of Yonsei University and the Editor-in-Chief of Global Asia, a quarterly magazine in English. Joining us virtually is Markus Garlauskas, and he is the director of the new Indo-Pacific Security Initiative of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. He leads this new initiative's efforts focused on security, prosperity, and freedom in the Indo-Pacific region. He formerly served as America's National Intelligence Officer for North Korea, leading strategic analysis of the DPRK for the U.S. intelligence community and non-government experts. And last but not least, of course, is Susan Thornton, is project director of the Forum on Asia-Pacific Security at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. She's a visiting lecturer in law at Yale Law School and senior fellow at the Paul Tsai China Center. In 2018, she retired from the State Department after a 28-year diplomatic career focused primarily on East and Central Asia. Her leadership roles in Washington included working on China and Korean policy and leading the negotiations in Pyongyang for monitoring of the agreed framework on denuclearization. So, Professor Moon, excuse me. Maybe you do have political aspirations.
Promoting me.
I'm thinking of the president who you serve. So, Professor Moon, I'm glad I got the audience engaged. Professor Moon, thank you for joining us today. Can you please begin by giving us your diagnosis of the situation?
Anyhow, thank you very much for Tom, and thank you very much for Susan. The situation is getting bad from worse, and the force-to-force confrontation between the North and the South is more dire than ever before, and both North and South have adopted so-called preemptive doctrine, and from defensive deterrence to some kinds of offensive, posture toward each other. The situation is very bad. But I would not agree with Robert Collin and Siegfried Hecker's diagnosis. They, in 38 North, they made the judgment that Kim Jong-un has made a strategic decision to go to the war, and like the Korean War in 1950. But I would not agree with their observation, even though they are a very close friend of mine. Their view is very alarmist, but I have different view on the Korean situation. I wouldn't say that war by plan is not imminent. However, my concern is accidental military crashes and escalation can be very, very dangerous in the first part of 2024. Why I draw that conclusion is very, very simple. If you read Kim Jong-un's rhetoric very carefully, everything is conditional. If South Korea and the United States takes military actions or preemptive action against North Korea, we are ready to fight against South Korea and the United States. It is same for President Yoon Suk-yeol too. His argument is always conditional. If North Korea makes a military provocation, we'll retaliate and to the extinction of the North Korean regime and the state. Therefore, both sides, even though they talk about preemptive rhetorics, and their actual behavior is very much reserved, and it is also conditional. And that means what? They are rational. They are not mad, and therefore they wanted to avoid war. South Korea has a lot to lose, okay? And North Korea might have nothing to lose, but it has a lot to lose because Kim Jong-un can cause his regime and also his own people too. Therefore, I would argue that the leaders in the North and South Korea are rational enough not to initiate war preemptively. Then what is my concern? And as I pointed out, an accidental military crashes in the West Sea, okay, and demilitarized zone and East Sea. And particularly concerning is West Sea and the demilitarized zone. And Kim Jong-un made it very clear, if South Korea intrude into the 0.001 millimeters of North Korean territorial water, okay, and North Korea will consider it as an act of war. That means what? North Korea will retaliate immediately and forcefully. Okay, and also President Yoon made it very clear, will defend the northern limit line to the last. Okay, and that kind of situation. And then starting from May, June, then we'll be having crab catch season, and there will be lots of commercial fishing boats that will be crowding in that area, and naval crash can take place anytime. Then how to control them, that is a big issue. Another big issue is when the southern wind began to blow toward the end of March, then a lot of so-called, the North Korean defectors in South Korea will try to send the propaganda balloon to North Korea. In 2014, North Korea shot them down by using anti-aircraft guns, and we retaliate with more than 10 times firepower. But if those North Korean defectors begin to send propaganda balloons, then North Korea will definitely shoot them down, and then we will retaliate. Then there could be escalation. Okay, and as you all know, the North Korea has more than 12,000 artillery, pieces along the DMZ. They can use them, and obviously allocate U.S. combined forces much superior to North Korea. And if North Korea regime feels threatened, existentially, and there is a good chance for North Korea to use tactical nuclear, weapons, because Kim Jong-un has declared that he has created so-called the Front Operation Group, which has tactical nuclear weapons, and also he's declared that North Korea has deployed tactical nuclear weapons along the DMZ, and plus North Korea can launch all these cruise missiles and ballistic missiles to target and any the target in South Korea. Therefore, that kinds of escalation is really worrisome. And also, our government has nullified the comprehensive military agreement after North Korea and launched the so-called military satellite, and then North Korea responded in kind. Now, comprehensive military agreement, which served as very important confidence-building measures between the North-South, is gone. But under that situation, and if we begin to send drones to make a surveillance of North Korea in the front line, particularly what you call the buffer zone, and North Korea is likely to shoot them down, and then we retaliate, and there can be escalation. Of course, we have a very important American role. America has two major functions to control that kind of escalation. One is the armistice agreement under the United Nations command can administer any kinds of escalation in those DMZ, demilitarized zone area. Another one is the United States Forces in America, particularly commander of Combined Forces Command in South Korea, retains wartime operational control over South Korean forces in South Korea. Therefore, if we engage in any kinds of military act, like the war, and then U.S. can intervene and control it. But problem is that acuteness of crisis in the West Sea and the demilitarized zone might make it very difficult for U.S. to intervene and control that escalation. It is more so both sides amassed a huge amount of artillery pieces along the borderline. That is a really worrisome, issue. That is why I'm really concerned. But in the past, we used to have hotlines with North Korea: military hotline, administrative hotline, political hotline. But they're all gone. Okay, that they are not working. And in the past, we used to have a back channel diplomacy, okay, with North Korea, but it's not functioning at all. In the past, the United States could intervene at the time of crisis using New York Channel and others, but it is no longer existence. China can be utilized in, calming down the North Korean behavior, but China has been very, very hesitant in intervening and mediating Korean Peninsula issues. The overall situation is quite, worrisome. Then now, how can we, resolve this problem? Not easy, okay? But one thing we have to do is, I think both North and South Korea should show self-restraining behavior. And now both sides are now engaging in what I call the proactive deterrence by escalation. Okay? That is not really good for the security and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Both sides calm down. Okay? Recently, the President Yoon Suk-yeol has shown and very restraining behavior, and our government was supposed to hold artillery firepower exercise in the buffer zone, but our government hasn't go ahead with that one. I think partly because of American, advice, and that is good. Therefore, our government is trying to diffuse kinds of crisis escalation, but North Korea has not responded to that one. North Korea has recently engaged in cruise missile test fire in West Sea, East Sea, and submarine launch, test fire. That is really worrisome. Of course, North Korean reaction was to allocate U.S.-Japan trilateral naval exercise in the south of Jeju Island. Therefore, it is kind of reactive from North Korea. But anyhow, the most important thing is we should come up with a kind of measures for crisis stability, de-escalation, and reducing risks. Okay? And also, it is very, very important for our government to restore alliance with North Korea, try to reactivate back-channel diplomacy with North Korea. And that kinds of confidence-building measures will be very, very vital to the crisis management on the Korean Peninsula. And also, the United States should more actively engage in terms of preventive diplomacy. Okay, deterrence is good, okay, and it's essential. However, we should go beyond the deterrence in such a way that we, create peace on the Korean Peninsula. But we have been so far, obsessed with conventional deterrence and extended deterrence. But ironically, deterrence is all about what, in Latin words, away from what from terror. But the situation of the Korean Peninsula has been getting worse and worse. We're feeling more insecurity. Therefore, we should get away from that trapping structure. And therefore, United States, the one dilemma is this. American assurance to South Korea, security assurance to South Korea is very, very important. But it should not create a situation in which North Korea feels threatened. It is not easy to come up with optimal measures. Okay? Therefore, the United States should pursue kind of double assurances, security assurance to South Korea. At the same time, the United States should be able to calm down North Korea, try to persuade them to come back to in a dialogue. But that is a really Herculean task. But the U.S. has been lacking that kind of behavior. Therefore, I think that American role is very, very important. Calming down South Korea and trying to bring North Koreans to dialogue and negotiation. That way, we can avoid from the current crisis on the Korean Peninsula. And also, Chinese role will be very, very important too. China has been some kinds of indifferent bystander. Because China has been arguing that the U.S. and South Korea should pursue what they call the double suspension and two-track approaches linking peace regime on the Korean Peninsula to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But our government and the American government have not followed that route. And since then, China has been arguing that it's a Korean Peninsula issue, none of our business, you got to handle yourself kinds of things. But China should change that kind of behavior. Otherwise, China will be accused of showing the very opportunistic behavior. In other words, in order to divert American attention from Taiwan Strait or South China Sea into the Korean Peninsula, okay, China might want to stir some kinds of tension over the Korean Peninsula. That will be very bad for China. Therefore, China needs to show more proactive diplomatic attitude toward the crisis stability on the Korean Peninsula. But finally, what I wanted to emphasize is this. Deterrence is very, very important, but preventive diplomacy is more important than deterrence. We should go pursue simultaneously, but the preventive diplomacy, confidence-building measures should come first. Okay, in today's war, okay, nobody wins war. Everybody loses. Okay, Gaza, Ukraine are the testimonials to a very simple proposition. Therefore, it is very important for us to avoid war. War can take place anytime soon in a very unexpected way. Therefore, I think with that in mind, I hope that particularly American government show its leadership in initiating and steering preventive diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. Sorry, I exceeded more than 5 minutes.
You're the expert, and you live on the Korean Peninsula, so I certainly wanted to hear all your views. Just some of my takeaways is that you are concerned that the risks of escalation are real, but I think it's reassuring your view that the threats coming from North Korea are conditional; they're not open-ended. So let me turn to Susan, and then I'll turn to Markus. So, Susan, let me ask, you're free to comment on anything you want, of course, but let me ask you a simple question. Why has it been so difficult to make progress with North Korea and ensuring a durable stability on the Korean Peninsula?
Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks so much for your presentation, Professor Moon. It's really compelling and interesting. I certainly liked the focus on preventive diplomacy. That's what we focus on in the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and what I did for 28 years in the State Department. So I think it's so alarming that we have had so little contact with North Korea, really going now back several years, but a complete cutoff, of course, during COVID. And very little now contact, including all the crisis management mechanisms that we used to have are now not functioning. And we have very little idea of what's going on inside North Korea. A few of the diplomatic missions that have people stationed in Pyongyang have been able to get their people back in just recently, but a lot of the aid agencies from the UN and other humanitarian agencies have not gotten back in. Most Western diplomats have not gotten back in. And so it's just a very thin communication line that we have right now. I thought it was very reassuring, though, what you said about conditional, kinds of statements about retaliation. I also thought it was important what you said about Kim Jong-un not being a madman, that he's a rational actor. And I hope you're right. And so far, that is, what we've seen. One thing that comes up often and that we wonder about is what kind of move he might make in order to influence political dynamics in South Korea coming up with the legislative elections, and what is he thinking with regard to the U.S. political situation this year, and whether, if he waits, he could get, a better situation next year. So that's one thing that I think sort of mitigates against seeing maybe some kind of provocations this year. But why has it been so difficult? Diplomacy with North Korea has been very difficult. You mentioned in the introduction, I worked in the Clinton administration on the agreed framework and led a negotiation in Pyongyang at that time. And we were trying to give assistance, food assistance, to North Korea, and the negotiation over us giving food assistance to North Korea was, can you hear me? The most difficult negotiation that I've ever is it going to be double? Okay. Participated in. So that gives you some idea of, even back then when we were trying to negotiate an exchange of kind of freeze in the nuclear program and dismantlement in exchange for energy sources, new power plants, heavy fuel oil, et cetera, how difficult it is to try to make headway and progress on issues with North Korea. I think, the difficulty in diplomacy since then is somewhat reflects this path dependency that we've gotten ourselves into on denuclearization, and the focus being on denuclearization. it's been 30 years since the agreed framework. Things have changed dramatically on the peninsula and with respect to North Korea's weapons programs and the developments there since 1994 when the agreed framework was put into practice. So, we've got to focus still, I think, on denuclearization because it's sort of a key to the entire non-proliferation regime, the global non-proliferation regime. But there are now so many more issues, and the leverage on the part of the Western and U.S. and other consortium members has really diminished. And along with, I think at that time, Kim Jong-un was, it was Kim Jong-il at that time was willing to, and the U.S. and the other consortium partners were willing to concede this fig leaf that North Korea was doing this nuclear development for energy purposes. Now it's clear that that is no longer the driver, and that Kim Jong-un sees his weapons programs as key to North Korea's security. So that has really changed the picture and made it a lot more difficult. I think we still are pursuing this idea of sort of aiming at the nuclear and the weapons programs, the missile programs, in exchange for sanctions lifting and economic benefits. That was the kind of deal that President Trump pursued when he was in office. But as we've seen during COVID, when the North Koreans shut their own border and had absolutely no exchange with the outside world, including trade, and they managed to survive, it's very difficult to see how sanctions lifting is going to lead them to concede something that they now see as key to their security. So I very much agree that we need to have some kind of negotiation going on with North Korea. There's data that's been collected, I think, by Victor Cha at CSIS that shows that when we're talking to North Korea, the number of weapons tests and provocations goes down, and when we're not talking to them, they go way up. But the difficulty is trying to find a way to talk to them. We at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy used to have a regular dialogue with the North Korean mission here at the UN. We haven't talked to them in, I think, 5 years at least. They've refused to respond to our invitations. So it's just incredibly difficult. I think politics is also, a problem of politics in North Korea, politics in the ROK, and politics in Washington. I think President Biden's got a lot on his plate right now. It's a very high-risk proposition, given the number of times that U.S.-North Korean negotiations have fallen apart, to get involved and lean forward on taking the initiative in trying to start a negotiation with North Korea now. So, it seems like we've got a door open to North Korea. We say we're willing to talk. It's not clearly enough to entice them to come out, and it makes for a very unstable situation right now.
Right. Well, I learned something new, that it's some good came out of the negotiations with North Korea, because they ratcheted down their weapons testing. So hopefully we can get back on a track of negotiations. Markus, welcome virtually. Let me turn to you. So there are differing perceptions on the risks coming from North Korea now. But on what risks and dangers should policymakers focus?
I think that's a great question, and this article in 38 North from Sagan and Bob has really brought forward this idea that we would be facing war with North Korea. But I agree with Professor Moon's take on what the nature of the overall risk of Kim Jong-un making an intentional decision to go to war is quite low. But I think the area in terms of the danger of military aggression that we need to be warning about and really more focused on is a couple of points actually within the overall spectrum of possible levels of escalation. And so the alliance overall is very well prepared, I think, for quite a limited action by North Korea, something perhaps accidental, as Professor Moon mentioned, or something that's a very limited action, whether it's a weapons test or it's the weapons firing along the DMZ by a guard post, or maybe even a small engagement between two vessels near the northern limit line. That's an area where I think the alliance is a comfortable place where we've been before. It's got some risks, it's got some dangers and some concern, but also the ROK military is very capable and ready, I think, to deal with that sort of thing. So the understanding is the ROK really takes the lead for dealing with that. The other more dangerous possibility that the alliance really focuses on preparing for is the potential for a full-scale, largely conventional, a non-nuclear war, basically, a war where the Combined Forces Command of the ROK-U.S. alliance has the lead, and we have a combined command structure to do these military exercises, and we're very, I think, focused on that possibility of a full-scale war. Even though that is, again, a very unlikely possibility, it's certainly a place where an escalation cycle could go. And I'm not saying we shouldn't prepare for that, and that we shouldn't try and deter that. But what concerns me more is a couple other places on the escalation spectrum. There's a lot more about this in some of the research work that we've been doing at the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, with the Scowcroft and the Atlantic Council. And so, just to hit some of the highlights, one of the areas where there is a real concern about deterrence and real risk is not an accident that takes us into a limited action by North Korea, but an intentional choice by the Kim regime to escalate
well beyond the level of a normal, typical provocation, but well short of the level that would be guaranteed to trigger a full-scale war, something with a limited goal, limited amount of violence. North Korea's capabilities in this space have been increasing, quite a bit. They have more precise and more numerous short-range missiles, some of which are being fired right now into Ukraine by Russia. So the North Koreans are seeing how these things work. We've seen the drone incursions by North Korea. We've seen various other military capabilities improving. And so when you look at the really large acts of violence by North Korea during the period of the armistice, like the shelling of Yongpyeong-do, like the sinking of the Cheonan, or even some of the things that we saw in the so-called Second Korean War period during the Vietnam War, like the attempted raid on the Blue House, the capture of the Pueblo, the shoot down of a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft. These are all intentional acts. And what I'm concerned about is that North Korea could go much further in this space than ever before with these heightened capabilities, with the confidence that also they have the backstop of nuclear deterrence, increased nuclear capability, and then also they have greater backing from Russia and China. And so this is one of the areas where I think we should focus deterrence. In addition, we should also focus on the potential, if there is a full-scale conflict or even a limited conflict, for North Korea to engage in tactical nuclear use. As Professor Moon, also warned, that's an area where we should focus as well. But I think the overall emphasis I would lay here, understanding we got a limited amount of time, is really in three areas. So first, we have to ensure the resilience of the alliance's military forces to reduce any perceived vulnerability to a surprise attack or to a limited nuclear attack, and decrease North Korea's incentive to escalate first. So this is basically the opposite of what you hear about punishment or even preemption, right? Is de-emphasize those things about going after the regime, or we're gonna strike first if you prepare to attack, or we'll retaliate and destroy the regime, and really focus on we can essentially take an attack from you. It will not stop us and it will not prevent us from responding strongly and doing what we need to do. And that even if you achieve some kind of limited tactical surprise advantage, it will not prevent us from defeating you. I think that's the first element in terms of capability and messaging. But again, you don't have to emphasize the preemption or the massive punishment there. Another big element is really focusing on this space between provocation and full-scale war, and ensuring that we have the ability to conduct a quick, combined, and calibrated responses. The U.S. and South Korean forces working together to meet North Korea at this mid-level of escalation, and again, something beyond Yongpyeong-do or the sinking of the Cheonan, but again, below the full-scale war. And then the third thing that we really need to do is counter Beijing's influence here. And Professor Moon touched on it, a little bit, in the fact that the Chinese have not been particularly helpful. But I think it's important to keep in mind that North Korea could try and use China essentially as a backstop for its aggression, use Chinese messaging and political cover to try and justify its escalation. And so we should make it very clear that the ROK-US alliance is not going to be manipulated or coerced by China into accepting North Korean aggression, and that we will not, because of fear, say, of a Chinese intervention or an intervention from Beijing, that won't prevent us from doing, say, what needs to be done to respond to North Korean aggression in that very dangerous set of waters off the west coast of Korea that, again, Professor Moon highlighted. So I do think that in that space between provocation and war is where we should be focusing, because Kim Jong-un is building up the capabilities to be able to fight in that space and to present us with this really very difficult dilemma of, do we accept that aggression? Do we allow them to achieve this localized victory? Or do we take the risk of responding strongly, understanding, though, that there will be the potential for the PRC to intervene, the potential for North Korea to escalate to nuclear use, but we can't allow those threats to prevent us from preparing for and thinking about how to respond in that space.
Yeah, thanks for your views. I mean, coming from your experience in the Intelligence Committee, but I don't understand what North Korea would gain from exploiting that space between provocation and war, and what would be the red lines for South Korea and the U.S. not to go all out and feel that war would be the proper response?
Yeah, so interesting, interesting question. And so I would say that there's a whole range of reasons that North Korea could choose to escalate and has choose to escalate in the past, and we don't always know the ground truth behind all of these incidents, even the ones that took place decades ago. But I think there are several things that North Korea has historically gotten out of these or sought to get out of these, and one is to intimidate the South Korea and the United States into caution and avoiding pressuring the North Korean regime, avoiding, for example, the information flow into North Korea. Things like as was mentioned earlier, scaling back things like balloon launches. That's one area. Another area is to really undermine the confidence of the people and the government of the Republic of Korea in the extended deterrence guarantees of the United States, even undermine the confidence in their own in the South Korean military, and this is a place where there's a real danger if North Korea is able to successfully escalate, successfully strike a blow and absorb the consequences, that it could really shake the confidence. And I think when you look back at 2010 and you saw how things transpired with the sinking of the Cheonan and the shelling of Yongpyeong-do, there were some very real concerns about deterrence, about the alliance. I think that's another element, and then one that was alluded to also earlier is the connection between North Korean domestic political considerations and the value of having a victory or an escalation. And you look, historically, Kim Jong-un was credited with having been the mastermind behind the 2010 attacks. Even though he was so young, Kim Jong-il was credited for some of the actions that took place when Kim Il-sung was leader. So the idea that some sort of aggression could be used to set up the succession process or build the legitimacy of Kim Jong-un and justify all the sacrifices they've made to develop their weapon systems and their capabilities. Those are just some of the reasons that we've seen discussed and we know as examples. But I think the bottom line is North Korea has a history of limited violence for a whole series of different goals, and it is one of their go-to tools in their toolkit. And so I think it's very hard, and it's a fair question. It's very hard sometimes from a perspective of a democratic country that values peace and livelihood to go, what are they hoping to gain here? But the fact of the matter is that they definitely have this history of seeing that they can make gains or try to make gains through this sort of aggression. So to the second part of your question, just real quickly, I think the problem is that the red lines are not clear. And to be fair, maybe the red lines shouldn't be too clear, because then Kim Jong-un would walk right up to them. And so this is the problem with this space is I think it's very clear. For example, if Kim Jong-un were to launch a nuclear attack on the Republic of Korea, say a nuclear weapon into Seoul, then of course the alliance declared policy is that we will bring an end to the regime. But I think that when you're talking about about something that is taking place at a mid or lower level, knowing exactly where the red lines are for what level of response. I don't think it's something that we can communicate in advance or maybe even know in advance. It's going to be very situationally dependent, and so I don't really think that there is a clear set of red lines below, knowing that there certainly once North Korea goes beyond a certain point, that it's going to trigger a full scale conflict. And so that's where I see the risk, is that there may be a sort of a misjudgment on where the red line lies, or there may even be a crossing of a red line where the Kim regime perceives that the response still is not going to be a regime-ending response, even if it is very robust. Because again, the concerns that North Korea would be able to retaliate with nuclear weapons, or that China would intervene or intercede, basically causing us in the alliance to say, okay, even though our red line has been crossed, we're still going to limit our response. And so that's why I'm really concerned in this particular space between war and provocation.
Okay, well, thank you. A lot to think about. Let me turn to Susan. So, tapping your expertise working on China, how does North Korea's changing relationship with Russia and China affect the situation now? How does it affect the emerging risks coming out of North Korea? I mean, to note that Kim Jong-un has embarked on a new era of symmetry, but this time with Russia's Putin rather than the South Korea's leader and president of the U.S. I mean, how do you interpret these developments?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know if North Korea's relationship with China is changing, but with Russia, it's certainly, if not changing, at least getting a lot more active. So, these relations are extremely complicated, I would say, particularly China, North Korea. China, Kim Jong-un's made some statements lately about food problems in North Korea. I mean, China has been a major source of food, and will not, and their main concern is about not having instability coming out of North Korea affecting China in its border regions. So they've been dedicated to providing kind of the minimum, at least, trade and food and energy resources to North Korea to keep it basically afloat. And that's been pretty consistent. They've not been super happy with North Korea, I think, over the years variously. When Xi Jinping first came into office, he didn't have any exchanges or go to North Korea for a few years. They were very unhappy about the nuclear tests. The Chinese have been certainly very exercised about preventing another nuclear test from North Korea, because those happen right on their border. So they're worried about nuclear fallout and other things. They've managed to not have a test for the last, I think, since 2017, right? But the Chinese, when I was there in January, just a couple of weeks ago, they were definitely talking about their concerns that there will be another nuclear test now coming. And they don't apparently know if their continued pressure to not have that happen will continue to work. It is the 75th anniversary of China DPRK relations, which is a big one. And, it'll be very interesting to see if Xi Jinping goes to the DPRK or if Kim Jong-un comes to China. Recently, the Chinese have been pretty unhappy about all of the activity between Russia and North Korea, to include, North Korean weapon sales to Russia that they've been using in the war in Ukraine. And certainly the summit meeting between Putin and Kim Jong-un was kind of a thumbing your nose at Beijing, and that was interpreted that way. And we saw some protocol kind of downgrades from China in the wake of all of that. So it's a complicated relationship, but the Chinese are not going to, especially in the face of such deterioration in the U.S.-China relationship and feeling that they have to defend against, the U.S., Japan, Australia, India kind of encirclement, they're not going to abandon North Korea or or actually, I think, do much to sort of weigh in with North Korea at our behest at this point. This is something that came up in Jake Sullivan and Wang Yi's meeting when they met last weekend in Thailand. The Chinese foreign minister and the national security advisor for the U.S. talked about North Korea. We don't really know how extensive the discussion was, but it's pretty clear that the Chinese, are fairly unhappy with the U.S. approach to North Korea. They think we should be trying much harder to try to get some kind of discussions going. And so they're kind of skeptical about our importuning them to weigh in with China when they think we're not doing what should be done. So in the backdrop of this, as I said, poor relationship, it's going to be tough to get them to do much more than they've been doing, I think.
Right. Okay. So, Professor Moon, you mentioned that to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula, or at least a more productive relationship with North Korea, that the government, South Korea and the U.S. should go beyond deterrence to preventive diplomacy. Can you elaborate on that, or, of course, react to anything that Susan or Markus said?
When you talk about peace on Korea on the Korean Peninsula, we have three different ways of conceptualizing. One is what you call the peacekeeping. Peacekeeping through deterrence and ROK-US alliance. Therefore, the peacekeeping is very kind of management of unstable peace through deterrence and alliance. But that is not enough, because when you talk about deterrence, it might assure our security, but it won't lead us to peace. On the contrary, we may fall into a trap of perpetual insecurity as a result of deterrence. That is why we need peacemaking efforts. Peacemaking is composed of tension reduction measures, confidence building measures, and in the case of Korean Peninsula, adoption of end of war declaration. Okay? And once we can adopt the end of war declaration, then we can make a transition to the transformation of armistice agreement into some sort of peace treaty or peace agreement on the Korean Peninsula. That kind of peace regime can be very, very conducive to the creation of peace and maintenance of peace. But even peacemaking itself deals with peacemaking itself is about how to manage unstable peace. Okay? And there we are talking about confidence building measures, arms control measures, arms reduction measures, and etc. Then ultimately we should have a peace building. And in the process of peace building, we can recall Immanuel Kant's Perpetual Peace. Immanuel Kant argues that in order to have a lasting peace, we got to have three important prerequisites. First, what we call capitalist peace. Now, his proposition was that the trading states do not fight each other. Therefore, North and South Korea should engage in much robust trade relations. Second proposition is what we call so-called democratic peace proposition. Democracies do not fight each other. Therefore, it is most ideal if North Korea can have a democratic regime, then North and South Korea having democracy would not fight each other. Okay, it won't be easy, but there is one proposition we got to think about. And finally, Immanuel Kant's third proposition on perpetual peace, is about what he called the Pacific World Federation, the Pacific Federation of the Republics. That has something to do with the idea of integration and unification in the Korean context. Therefore, if North and South Korea can have much robust trade relations, have a similar political regime, and have integration or unification, then if we have if North and South Korea becomes integrated in one state, there's no concept of war. War is about with other sovereign entity, right? Therefore, in that way, we can build peace on the Korean Peninsula. The North Korea will not be happy about it, but it might take a long time. But in doing that, we have two major issues. One major issue is how to assure some kinds of strategic empathy toward North Korea. Okay, we got to think about what North Korea intends and what North Korea thinks. That is very important element. Another one is how to resolve North Korean nuclear issue. Okay, those two will be the most important, hurdles to peacemaking and eventually peace building on the Korean Peninsula. But as a strategic empathy, that is important because as long as we demonize North Korea, then there is no chance for peace. Unless we have diplomatic normalization with North Korea, it will be extremely difficult to find ways to peace. Therefore, even if North Korea is not showing behavior which we wish, but my basic argument is that still we need to have, particularly the United States, need to have a diplomatic normalization with North Korea. That is the best way of changing North Korean policy behavior. You had the diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union during the Cold War period. You had the diplomatic ties with China when you had the very hostile relation, with some sort of hostile relation with China. Therefore, I think that we got to really rethink about our relations with North Korea, because after all, the most important thing in the North Korean context is recognition of their identity. Okay, no matter how we do not like it, I think there should be some kind of starting point. Therefore, mutual recognition and respect should be the first step toward the long journey toward peace in Korea.
Okay. Well, thank you. Before we turn to our audience question, I think one of the questions that I got, I don't know if Thomas Hughes in the audience or the virtual audience, but he asked the question: is there a feasible road map to peaceful unification? And I think what are the critical components? I think you just answered it. In part, no demonization and diplomatic recognition, and then the other aspirational elements. But Chelsea, are you here with the mic? Should we go to the in-person questions? To kind of, if you come in person, you get to ask the questions first. I know sometimes it's hard to come in person, but some reward. So let's over here, Steve.
Thanks. This was a great discussion.
Can you just identify yourself briefly and then ask your
Steve
question?
Cartman Associates. My question is, if China attacks or invades Taiwan, what are the chances that North Korea will then move against South Korea?
Anyone want to?
I think the chance is very low.
Okay.
Because as long as you have alliance with the United States, U.S. combined forces will be quite formidable to deter North Korea from taking military action. And therefore, as long as there is security assurance from the United States in terms of conventional deterrence and extended deterrence, it will be very difficult for North Korea to take that kind of military adventurism on South Korea, even if there is a war going on cross Strait and South China Sea.
Susan,
I would just add that, I think there's been a lot of talk in the U.S. media about China invading Taiwan, but certainly in the recent period, that talk has diminished. In part because China's facing a lot of internal problems, but also China's foreign policy is pretty defensive and paranoid. So, the idea that they're going to stir up trouble in North Korea, these are not, that's not generally, that's more of a Russian kind of gloss on things to sort of take risks and stir up trouble. The Chinese tend to not like chaos, especially on their borders. So I have a hard time. I hear it in Washington a lot that the Chinese are going to use the North Koreans to stir up trouble. But that doesn't tend to be their MO in their foreign policy. They tend to be a lot more conservative and defensive. So we'll see. This question came up a lot when I was in Korea the last time. Many Koreans were asking the question of, do you think Kim Jong-un would take advantage of something that the Chinese would do? And I think I agree with Professor Moon, but I don't see this China and North Korea working together to sow trouble. I mean, we see Russia and North Korea working together to sow trouble, but I think the Chinese are more cautious than that.
Markus, what's your take on the risk of a two-front war in East Asia?
So I think the risk is very high. The probability, is sort of open to question. But I think the discussion that we just heard highlights a couple of the different analytic biases that we have when we talk about this thing. Number one, there's this tendency to think about it, well, if Beijing and Pyongyang are not actively colluding, then the simultaneity won't happen. Or the idea that deterrence will not be affected basically as long as there's an ROK, U.S. alliance. And I think to be fair, we've studied this quite a bit. We've done some tabletop exercises on it. We have an incomplete report that was published last year on the possibility of the two-front conflict and limited nuclear attacks. And the conclusion that we came to actually is that if there is a conflict that either starts on the Korean Peninsula or starts with the PRC, say in the Taiwan Strait, that the potential for this conflict then to escalate horizontally and engulf the other is actually quite real, because there's so many different pathways to get there. So it's not something that necessarily would happen at the beginning, like Beijing and Pyongyang coordinate and say, hey, let's go to war at the same time, or Xi Jinping calls up Kim Jong-un and says, hey, I need you to start a war on the Korean Peninsula because I'm going to invade Taiwan. That is an artificial scenario. I'm not saying it's impossible, but and there have been cases, of course, in history where things like that have occurred. But this is not the scenario that I'm concerned about. The scenario I'm concerned about most of all is if a conflict happens over Taiwan, and again, I agree with the premise too, by the way, that this is not something necessarily going to happen in the near term, but looking 5 to 10 years out as the political issues change and intensify, and as the capabilities of the PRC military grow, then the potential for a decision is real, and that North Korea is more capable at that point as well. And so what could happen if there's this decision to resolve the Taiwan issue through force? If it doesn't get resolved very quickly, and that either Xi Jinping admits defeat or a successor admits defeat, or there's a surprising collapse of Taiwan and of U.S. and will of those others who are going to participate in the defense of Taiwan, unless it happens very quickly, it's naturally going to escalate geographically. And in particular, all of the U.S. bases in the region, good reason to believe that they would be targeted by the PRC. And that leaves the question, does the PRC target the U.S. bases in the Republic of Korea or not? And it leaves these difficult questions about, okay, if U.S. forces in Korea are not going to be employed in this existential war potentially with China, then what does that mean for the ROK-U.S. alliance if U.S. forces are defending the Republic of Korea from North Korea, but the Republic of Korea won't live up to its mutual defense treaty obligation to defend the U.S. bases that are being attacked? I mean, so it creates a lot of problems. So looking at the first day of the conflict, what we just heard, I think it's reasonable. But as the conflict develops and the operational and political realities come into play, it takes a series of consecutive miracles, basically, to prevent the conflict from spreading. And also, let's not forget, too, that North Korea could very easily have not just an opportunistic reason to engage in aggression because it sees the opportunity there because the U.S. is distracted or weak or something else, or even that the Chinese are also firing at U.S. bases, so it makes their war fight easier. It's if there is a U.S.-China war over Taiwan, this will have fundamental existential consequences for the shape of East Asia and truly the shape of the world. And the idea that North Korea would just kind of think they could sit on the sidelines if China loses that conflict because North Korea didn't help tie down U.S. forces, didn't strike U.S. bases, this could end very badly for North Korea. But alternatively, if China is going to win, North Korea not having been helpful in that victory could put North Korea in a very difficult spot. And so I just don't see North Korea being able to sit on the sidelines, even if in the beginning it wanted to. And so this is worth, I think, a whole nother hour's worth of discussion. But I think the bottom line is there are so many pathways where that conflict could grow and expand. And it's going to be a real challenging issue for the alliance to deal with. And I think this is something the alliance really needs to focus on in the coming years, really pay attention to this possibility. How will the alliance prepare for it? Deter North Korea preferably, or potentially have to fight China and North Korea at the same time. I think this is something very real. And then the reverse, of course, I think is more talked about and understood. The potential that if North Korea launches an attack on South Korea, would China intervene to save the North Korean regime from the consequences of its own mistake, just in many ways as it did in 1950? Tom, your very own Jonathan Corrado has wrote very, I think, persuasively on why we should consider this idea, and I agree with him as well. So I'll stop there. You can tell that this is a topic that I'm very interested in. We've written and talked about quite a bit at the Atlantic Council.
Yeah, I agree. But Markus, thanks for teasing out even more complexity to a complex situation. I really want to take advantage of, we're very fortunate to have Professor Moon and Susan and Markus here with us. So I'd like to go into overtime. We passed our 60 minutes, but I see one question over here on the left. The lights are in my eyes, and then I'll go over. Okay. And then, 1, 2, 3. All right. We'll take 3 questions.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
I was just going to say collect some questions.
All right. Why don't we collect three questions? 1, 2, and 3 in the middle. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. My name is Kenneth Lee. I'm a lawyer at Sullivan and Cromwell. The current situation we're in is very different from the situation we were in several years ago during the Moon administration and the Trump administration. My question is mostly directed to Professor Moon. During that period, truly how close were we to a real breakthrough in diplomatic relations with North Korea? And if we were close, do we want to be in that kind of similar situation in the future, relying on personal diplomacy and other ways to build diplomatic ties? Thank you.
Okay, let's take 2 more questions. Yeah, in the front. Okay, Okay, we'll get you. You're the third.
It's Giorgio Toloraya, UN, United Nations. I've got a little bit different interpretation of Kim Jong-un's recent statements, not as a preparation for war, but as a sort of a new policy of what I would call benign negligence towards South Korea. So you have some certain relation with the country you want to reunify with, but if it's just a hostile state, you just have to coexist. So what do you think about it? And my second small question, you mentioned about some communication U.S. and, of course, South Korea have with China on North Korean issue, and you mentioned Russian factor. And there's zero communication with Russia from both capitals now. What do you think about it?
Okay, and finally?
Jessica.
Yeah.
Hello, Jessica Taylor. I'm a PhD candidate at Princeton and a non-resident fellow under Markus at the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. Hello, Markus. So my question is in reference to Professor Moon's remark and Markus's remarks about the concern between provocations and full-scale conflict. Do you think there should be a change in the structure of the alliance as far as, right now when we're about to go out full-scale conflict, we institutionalize Combined Forces Command, and would, having a restructure of the way that we institutionalize Combined Forces Command, would that help deterrence and help keep both the U.S. and South Korea kind of making sure that they're on the same page in how we respond to those provocative actions that are between lower level and full-scale conflict?
Okay. So who wants to jump in here and answer? I mean, I just was there a breakthrough under the Moon government, or how close? This concept of benign negligence, I think that's on the part of both South Korea and the U.S.
I was,
and structure of the alliance.
In 2000, in the June 15 summit in Pyongyang, I had the exact same feeling as President Kim Dae-jung. I thought the peace is coming, war is far away. And therefore, that is famous President Kim Dae-jung's speech at the Seongnam airport when he landed from Pyongyang. He said, I realized that the war is far away, now peace is coming near. And I had the same feeling. And when I visited Pyongyang in October 2007 with President Roh Moo-hyun, and there was a lot of hard times between Kim Jong-il and Roh Moo-hyun, but finally they reached October 4th Pyongyang Declaration, and I was there, and also I felt that peace is coming very near. We could overcome it. At that time, also Kim Jong-il showed that his very sincere effort toward the nuclear negotiation within the frame of six-party talks. Therefore, we thought that there is progress is being made, and the nuclear issue, and also both agreed to adopt the end of war declaration. Therefore, we thought that there would be major progress. And in 2018, again, Pyongyang, and that, May 1st Stadium, President Moon Jae-in gave a speech to the 150,000 Pyongyang citizens that today I met your leader, and we agreed to get rid of nuclear weapons and create peace for your children and grandchildren, whatever. And those 150,000 Pyongyang citizens really applaud President Moon Jae-in with great cheers. And after having gone through all this process and have seen all those documents, whenever I visited Pyongyang, whenever there was a summit, I thought peace was coming near and war is far away. But there was always breakdown. And the breakdown mostly come from the conflict coming from, Pyongyang and Washington. At the same time, political changes in South Korea. One is a diplomatic, entanglement between Pyongyang and Washington. Another one is a regime change in South Korea, government change in South Korea. Those two will be the most important one. And going with Jessica's, the question, and I think that there will be no change with regard to CFC structure between the U.S. and South Korea, and all this transfer of wartime operational control has been suspended. And we had the so-called second stage negotiation with the United States during the Moon Jae-in government, but because in light of crisis looming on the Korean Peninsula, and I think the Yonsei government has stopped it. Therefore, the wartime operational control will be still in the hand of American commander in South Korea, and also all this idea of coming up with a new division of labor among the United Nations Command, allocate Joint Chief of Staff and American forces in South Korea, and allocate U.S. Combined Forces Command. The coming up with new terms of engagement among four and division of labor among four units was the most important part of restructuring, institutional restructuring of allocate U.S. alliance. But I think that discussion is virtually suspended too. Therefore, there will be continuation of existing alliance structure, and I don't see any major changes. One change is there could be kind of enlargement of the United Nations Command in South Korea. It will have a more multinational, characteristics. Of course, the opposition party in South Korea will be critical of that move, but that is one major change. Other than that, there will be continuation of existing alliance structure during the period of conservative government to now. Therefore, as long as the Yonsei government is in power, I really don't see any major changes in institutional aspect of allocate alliance. Mm-hmm. Georgia, what was your question?
Coexistence.
I said that the interpretation of Kim Jong-un's new policy is just ignoring South Korea as a hostile state and coexist with it, not try to reunify or undermine it.
Yes.
It's what I call benign negligence on North Korean's part.
We have been, South Korean government is pursuing hostile negligence policy of North Korea. Therefore, North Korea's benign negligence is better than our hostile negligence of North Korea. It's very bad. But you got to remember one thing. Since 1991, when we adopted the basic agreement on non-aggression, reconciliation, and exchange and cooperation, since that document, in fact, our South Korean's basic position is what? In fact, not unification. It was so-called the Union of No South Korean States. There was two-state idea was deeply embedded in South Korean proposal. But North Korea was not. North Korea was interested in federation model, confederation model. They always argue that one nation having one state and two local government, two systems. But our government position, regardless of progressive or conservative, in fact, two state, one people, two state, and two government and two systems. Therefore, in other words, there was North Korea. You can say that North Korea has been responding to our old proposal on two-state approach, but now at a time it was not hostile, but now it is hostile. Therefore, I really don't see any big difference. Even though a lot of North Korean observers argue that that Kim Jong-un's statement on December 30th underlines a major shift in North Korean thinking. I really don't think so. But another important point is this. Now, Kim Jong-un will be eliminating Department of United Front of Korea Workers' Party. That's the most important agency for inter-Korean relations. He get rid of Jo Pyong-tong, okay? And also he get rid of, Min Kyung-yeon, Min Hwa-yup, and all this, so-called agency dealing with South Korea. That is really significant departure. Now, North Korea will be having the age of foreign ministry. It's a new beginning. In the past, Department of the United Front of Korea Workers' Party is always above the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now it is gone. Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be treating South Korea as a normal state. Maybe there could be kind of normalization. Remember, President Yoon Suk-yeol has been arguing that our relations with North Korea have been abnormal. And there are a lot of conservatives in South Korea have been arguing that we should get rid of Ministry of Unification. Let foreign minister handle it. Now, therefore, North Korea, Kim Jong-un responded to President Yoon Suk-yeol's call to normalization. It's irony.
In the closing minute, Susan and then Markus, would you like to react to any of the three questions? Or all of the three questions?
I just had, on the question about sort of the breakdown under the previous administration, because President Trump, was so central to all of that. And the question about sort of what will Trump's approach be if he gets back into office to North Korea has come up a lot, I think. And it's we've heard, kind of two different theories. One is that he wants to still make a deal and he wants to go back to have some kind of symmetry with Kim Jong-un. And the other side would say, no, he's abandoned that and going to move on to other things and not take that risk. So I think it's at the last summit meeting in Hanoi, Trump's position was, well, if we don't get this done today, we can meet again, no problem. Of course, that wasn't the way it was seen by Kim Jong-un, but it's just interesting that in Trump's mind, this was not some kind of a failure or the end of the road. So I think it's interesting to just think about what might happen in the future, and lots of things can happen.
That's right. That's why the future's so interesting. Markus, do you want to close out?
Yeah, I'll try and answer all three in 1 minute. So first of all, I'm very skeptical on the personal diplomacy aspect. I think it's a lot of show, a lot of emotion, but not necessarily a lot of substance. And I don't think it's worked out very well over these times that it's been tried. The second one on the shifting North Korean line. I do think it's a recognition of the fact that reunification would be a disaster for the North Korean regime's control. That level of contact with South Koreans just would not allow the regime to maintain the pillars of its power and the control over its people. So it's a recognition of reality rather than a fundamental change in policy, but it's a recognition of the reality aligning with propaganda. And then lastly, to Jess's great question, I do think there is a need for a structure that will allow for short-term, very quick, calibrated and combined ROK-US alliance responses to aggression by North Korea that is short of war, but beyond a typical provocation. I think that structural change is needed. There's many different ways we could do it. We could empower CFC. We could have a small combined task force, et cetera. Again, could be a whole other conversation, but I do think it's needed. I'm just worried that it's not going to happen until after we need it. So I'll leave it with that.
Okay. Well, thank you. So thanks to my panelists for sharing your insights and views. very thought-provoking for me, and I think I actually learned some things today. So it was a good use of my time. And thank you all for coming here. We have almost a full house, and thank you all for joining virtually. And the Korea Society is a 501c3 nonprofit, so we would welcome membership in the Korea Society so we can maintain our nonprofit status. So thank you very much.
Thank you.